welcome back. I'm glad I got to go right after lunch rather than before. I respect everyone that can command a crowd before lunch. I cannot. My name is Boris Siperstein. I have the pleasure of being one of the U.S. board members. It's perfect that the last panel almost teed it up quite right for us, because one of the mentions by Pradeep was the need for talent in this industry. And I have the pleasure of being able to introduce any of you who have not gotten to know Vishal and Radhika to the talent and the horsepower and really the brains that are driving the U.S. efforts for supporting Dasra in India, and that's a distinct pleasure of mine. You know, it's interesting that as an organization, I think the position that we find ourselves in is sort of a fiduciary, a shepherd, a confidant, and an implementer. So there's a lot of hats that these two have to wear in balancing everything that's happening in India, being knowledgeable, and balancing a lot of needs in the US. And there were talks of trends and sort of journeys that people are taking, where they are in their arc of their journey. And I think it's an interesting place to start to find out how the two of you got to Dasra, because we seldom get the chance to just sit back and reflect, but I'd love to have everyone hear the stories of how you got here. So either one of you. Vishal, maybe you could
sure.
start.
Happy to. Thanks for that intro, Boris. And I just want to say, I mean, before we get started, so the last time Boris did a session like this was actually in Houston in 2016 at our Dasra Philanthropy Forum there, and we had Neera and Deval on stage. So it's like Radhika and I have super big shoes to fill. So we'll try. We'll do what we can.
I made them look like idiots, so it's easy. Go ahead.
And so my story to Dasra, interestingly, it happened on my journey back to India. Happened 10 full years after Deval and Neera's, which I found out, of course, after I moved there. But for me, it was, so I grew up in India, born and raised in India, came to the US for my undergrad. And interestingly, it was in the US, in a small liberal arts college in Connecticut, that I started learning more about India and about the social demographics, economic issues, through my undergrad major in economics and in development economics. That got me interested, and I started wrapping my head around, well, there are issues in our country. I've had a pretty privileged upbringing, and felt like I wanted to understand and learn how the other half, or, well, we know it's clearly much more than the other half, lives, and expose myself to that. And it was in college, it was more through coursework and courses in like international studies and South Asian history, and with my friends from not just India, but like Pakistan and Bangladesh, and people I was meeting from South Asia as a region for the first time in my life. In India, I didn't have exposure to that. And that then continued, that stayed with me. I did an economics undergrad. I joined a consulting firm in Boston, did that for 4 years. So this is sort of, between 2006 and 2010. And during that time, there was a lot of, talk and excitement and maybe a bit of hype around some of the themes we've heard today, that I think India started being seen as this place that would give rise to the solutions to the world's problems, not just to the problems themselves. And that there was this growth of what we would call intermediaries. I know intermediaries is like a bad word, but for lack of a better word, a growth of this intermediary sector. I hadn't heard of Dasra at the time, but there were others like, Acumen and Monitor Inclusive Markets that were attracting private sector talent. So someone like me with the econ undergrad and like a consulting background could work with these organizations, learn and add value at the same time. So I had friends who I was speaking with who had made these transitions. I was still in the US at my economic consulting firm on weekends, and well, even during work sometimes I'd be opening up issues of like the Economic and Political Weekly of India. I probably spent some good billable work at my firm learning about India and setting me up for that stuff.
We don't judge.
And so, and then I was like, well, it's I can either go to business school. The choices for me, as I saw them then, were I can go from, follow a pretty straight trajectory that a lot of my peers did, undergrad, sort of work at this consulting firm, apply to some of the business schools, or I could try this other route and actually go back and test how much I was interested in this stuff, learning about development in India, about nonprofits, doing work on the ground, social innovation. Some of you here may have heard of C.K. Prahlad. He had written this book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. It was a big thing at that time, profiling organizations like Jaipur Rugs, Husk Power Systems, and others that Dasra's actually worked with, which I found out later, that were doing amazing things, kind of like Rikin was talking about, in the far-flung reaches of India. And that just struck a chord with me, and I was like, this is the discovery of India that I want to have. I want to go back, I want to travel, expose myself to where this is happening, see how it actually happens on the ground, how does development happen, and if anything, if I can contribute some skills there and help these organizations in any way, that would be amazing. And if nothing else, if I did that and all of it didn't work out, it would still look pretty good on the resume, right? And I could still go back to business school. So, it was a low risk for me at the time. So I did that. I joined Dasra in 2010. We had just launched our first philanthropy forum, and things had really started picking up. Dasra was founded in '99, and we've sort of gone through different evolutions and models. But at the time that I joined in 2010, we were 8 of us in an office in Bombay. And within a period of sort of 6 years before I moved with Dasra to the US, we had grown to over 100. So it's been a really steep growth. That number from 8 to 100 here in like Silicon Valley doesn't feel like much at all. We have companies going from tens to thousands in shorter time spans. But for an organization like Dasra that is an intermediary, not also a direct implementation nonprofit, to grow like that means a lot, and we'll unpack that during the session. But I got that. I got my exposure. I got to travel. I joined what was then called Dasra's diligence and capacity building teams. So working with organizations that our research team had actually highlighted in different issue areas that we've been working on. And actually vetting them, running them through a rigorous due diligence program, spending a lot of time out with them in the field, and helping them put some of these plans for growth and scale down on paper. And then once sort of we funded them, actually hand-holding them through their journey and ensuring that they were on a steep trajectory to growth. So I got my discovery of India. And what I did not at that point anticipate was actually Dasra's own growth story. When I joined, I was like, it's about me, this is what I want to learn. But Dasra, we had plans of our own. Our organization was scaling, and a lot of stuff I was seeing that I was doing with the nonprofits in our portfolio, and we'll talk more about this, but building out their human resource structures, their org structures, helping them hire. We were doing the same thing at Dasra, and the combination of those two things just kept me hooked. And I mean, I haven't thought of going back to business school since.
That's good.
Anyways.
Radhika, I know we snagged you from some alternative paths as well, so why don't you inform everyone?
Sure. So like some of the speakers we've heard from today, such as Payal Patel, who spoke earlier, as you can tell by my accent, I grew up in the US. And so my journey to India was a bit different. I was looking for an adventure. I was curious about all of that Vishal is speaking about when it comes to what I was hearing about social innovation in India. I came across Dasra and I thought, wow, I can't believe these, Deval, who's from the US, and Neera, who's from Canada, are working on changing the culture of philanthropy in India and making Indians more generous, thoughtful, strategic in their philanthropy. Because as an Indian American, I knew that it was very difficult to even engage my peers on social change issues. And I saw that there was a big gap and big opportunity in the Indian American community to really take on some philanthropic leadership roles. And then I thought to my family in India, and I said, wow, they're never going to give it strategically or thoughtfully. So I thought this was a really bold mission, and I wanted to be part of the movement. But unlike Deval and Neera, I was a lot more risk averse. And so, and there was a lot of family, I wouldn't say disapproval, but lack of enthusiastic endorsement. And so there were a number of external factors that also pushed me in the direction, and all roads really led to Dasra. I also graduated from a liberal arts college. After graduating, I worked for a brief time at Wellesley Centers for Women, which is a research think tank on women and gender issues. Then I interned at the UN, and my parents, as typical immigrant parents, said, get a real job. And so then I thought, well, okay, I guess I'll go to law school. So I was a paralegal working in an asset management company. It was recession time. I got laid off. And at the same time as I was doing my day job, I was pursuing what I really wanted to do, which was doing fundraising and community building work, specifically for a South Asian women's organization called Sakhi for South Asian Women in the New York area. And that's a whole other different story, but it's interesting that there's South Asian women's organizations in probably every city across the US that focus on domestic violence. So that's a huge issue in the South Asian immigrant population here that we need to address. But I launched their Young Professionals Fundraising Committee, and it was just a real struggle to get people my age engaged on this issue. And then I became really curious about, well, how do you influence people to give of their time and resources to social change? And I came across Dasra, and then I eventually moved to India, and I stayed with extended family in Delhi. And while I was in Delhi, I was looking for a Dasra equivalent. So my parents said, okay, it'll be fine for us if you lived in Delhi because we have family there, we know people there, but we don't want you to live in Mumbai. So then in Delhi, I tried to look for an equivalent to Dasra, an ecosystem builder, an organization that was changing the culture of giving, and I couldn't find an equivalent. And then I also started researching a number of other organizations and did some grant writing work for a number of nonprofits. And then I ended up recommending those nonprofits to the Dasra Social Impact programs, which are peer learning programs. And because I saw that their fundraising strategy was not sustainable and that they needed to learn from a peer group, they needed to learn from their peers about how to really advance their work. So then I thought, wow, I'm like a Dasra ambassador already, and I should just move. And so then eventually I found myself with the team and with my tribe.
So you basically just wanted to piss off your parents, and you chipped away at it till you got it.
Right.
Good. And I think it speaks to, I know some of your backstories. I think it does speak to what I said, that the talent need and the fact that someone mentioned earlier that what we don't need necessarily, while it's welcome, but the main thing we need is people who have a long road ahead of them, right? This isn't their last step. And I think you're two good examples, very similar to Deval and Neera, who I know very well, took that leap, right? They took the leap, but it was a bold move. I'm sure there were the same family discussions that probably happened, and we're lucky that we are getting that talent into the sector. Now, you both arrived at Dasra roughly around the same time, sort of chronologically in the organization's development. What's different? You alluded to it earlier, Vishal, but what have you seen, Radhika, maybe you start, what have you seen the organization grow into? How has that maybe interacted with the ecosystem development? How has the organization influenced the ecosystem development? Speak a little bit to, how has the organization grown? Because I think it's relevant.
Sure. So, Vishal joined a different part of Dasra. He joined the team really working hands-on with nonprofits. And I was sort of an anomaly. I think I wanted to work more on the donor relations side. And as I said earlier, really understand how to motivate people and encourage people to participate in social change and give of their time and resources. And over the course of my time in India, so I joined the organization in 2011, and I was on our strategic philanthropy team at that time was called the Indian Philanthropy Forum. And during my time in India, I learned a lot. I learned that I didn't know a lot about what was going on in India. And I had assumed that there was a compassion deficit, but there really was a knowledge and trust deficit in terms of philanthropy. Because in India, there's 3.3 million nonprofits. And very few of those nonprofits are the size, the scale, have the skills internally to really make a dent on India's development challenges. So philanthropists don't know where to give or how to give. And they have a healthy skepticism about philanthropy as a vehicle for social change that I didn't have as an American moving to India. And also, I also realized that people were generous and charitable, but in unstructured ways. They gave to extended family, they gave to household help, and in some ways, there was a humility when it came to philanthropy that as Americans, maybe we don't have, or that people who didn't have the last name of Godrej or Piramal or were part of the billionaire families in India, they didn't see themselves as agents of social change or people who could really advance the sustainable development goals. They wondered, how I'm not really a philanthropist, even if I'm a high net worth individual. And so I think what Dasra has done is been able to provide entry points for everyone to see themselves as agents of change and provide those mechanisms where you can really leverage the resources you bring to the table by collaborating with others. And one of the ways that we do that is through the Dasra Giving Circle, which is this really methodical process that invites donors to invest in an organization over 3 to 5 years, become a partner to that nonprofit, and provide unrestricted funding. And that was a very novel and innovative idea and concept. And on the donor side, I saw that it really changed people's mindsets when it came to nonprofit organizations. So literally what the Dasra Giving Circle does is it puts nonprofits and philanthropists on the same table as peers. And where Dasra facilitates this interaction where nonprofits and philanthropists end up speaking the same language. And Dasra, and meeting philanthropists really where they are and then engaging them into deeper levels of understanding when it comes to certain issues. And that was, I saw that really changed people's perception. And for example, during some of our Giving Circle sessions, I saw that philanthropists and nonprofit leaders, each of them had told the Dasra team, wow, I'm really surprised at the humility and intelligence of the other party. And that was pretty shocking, and it was incredible to see that level of instant impact. And it's such a simple concept, but it's not done frequently. And I think Vishal can speak more to what that Dasra Giving Circle does for nonprofits, and feel free to.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think, like you said, Radhika, we did these giving circles, and we've thrown that word around. So let me just explain what the prototypical one was. And it's not that we're wedded to this. We've tried different combinations of it, and they've been successful. But the giving circle, in its sort of original design, was we took, and this was in 2010. We started working on the first one around girl powers, focusing on education for girls in India. Was basically 10 individuals, 10 philanthropists who each commit $50,000 to $75,000 over 3 years. And you get 10 of them, you've got a pool of between $500,000 to $750,000. And that we found through trial and error was actually a meaningful sum of money. So for the Indians and those who work with sort of Indian denominations, we were looking at between 3 to 4 crore rupees, Indian rupees, which was meaningful for a growth stage nonprofit to sort of to take that money and help them scale. And the funding was unique in the sense that, and this is where a lot of the work that Radhika and her team was doing was to convince these people that this fund, this pool of money from these 10 people that they were committing was long term. So we're talking about 3-year commitments at a time. We're talking about unrestricted funding. So while that money was going, some of it was going to scale a program, our belief system was that scaling the program isn't enough because how do you sustain that, what you're scaling? So we've got to start looking at it not just in terms of scaling a program, but you're scaling the institution around that program, and you're building the leadership potential within that organization. So we spoke to the leaders of these organizations to invest a good sum of that money, 50% and upwards, and actually those other areas, not just the program on the ground, but on sort of bringing in management at senior levels across the organizations that would spend time on that program, but other programs, as well as having their leadership team go for leadership education programs. We've had organizations attend the Strategic Perspectives and Nonprofit Management program at Harvard Business School. Kavita, one of the entrepreneurs here who's up on stage in the first half of the day, is actually going to attend that program right after this. And so it was a different kind of funding for different purposes within these organizations. Now, what it meant on the organization side of things was actually getting them to dream a little bit and think about their growth differently. So this starts right back, so when we say giving circles, the work that leads to the selection of these organizations and the culmination of these individual funders, the 10 of them, and the organizations in the room happens after 9 months. In the previous 9 months, we've spent time, our research team and our diligence team has spent time on the ground, understanding the issues, understanding the role of the government in these issues, because a lot of these policies, like Kavita, like Meera was saying earlier, there is government money for these programs. So how are these organizations thinking about engaging with the government, and what policies and potential funding allocations does the government have? So we profile the role of the government, which interventions does academic research tell us actually works. We're not going to recreate academic literature with our research. It was more really curating what was out there and bringing it and packaging it in a way a philanthropic audience could understand. And then finally, we understand the interventions that work, which are the nonprofits that are implementing those interventions. I mean, it's good to have theoretical interventions, but if no one's on the grounds actually doing it or has tried it, then how do you know if it actually really does work? And so identifying those organizations, and that sort of took 9 months, and towards the last stages of that due diligence, when we started whittling it down from like 250 nonprofit organizations to about 10 that were profiled in our report, and then about 3 to 4 that pitched to these donors, the conversation became a lot less about diligence and more about, we believe in the work that we're doing, we understand the programs that y'all are doing work, there is report and impact data behind that convinces all of us. Let's talk about where you want to go with this, right? So what's the next phase? If funding weren't restricted, how would you grow this program? And counterintuitively, we realized that was really hard for the organizations to do, because to think in an unrestricted manner for a lot of these growth stage nonprofits, if funding weren't restricted, how would they grow their team? So they came back with plans that were great programmatic plans, and we were like, don't just tell us how you want to scale this program from 1 slum to sort of 10 slums or 100 slums, or like 10 villages to 500 villages. How are you going to change as an organization to achieve that, right? And then how do we sustain that in terms of both the program on the ground, but how will you continue raising funds to keep at that level? And that's a big legitimate concern that these organizations have, because you can put short-term, restricted money for these organizations, and it's going to be sporadic and programmatic, because then they're always thinking about, we're going to hire a team for this program, what's going to happen if the funder leaves? And if you're not making a long-term grant, they can't think like that. So the culture has been quite a bit like that. So we needed to communicate with them in a different way. And so a lot of the work happened in the business planning stages, which then led to these conversations. And because we were able to help them speak a language and articulate their plans in a manner, then we realized that, okay, this is what the philanthropists understand. So when they were starting to articulate their plans in this manner, that we're going to do this program, but we're going to grow institutionally like this, and this is why we need to, the philanthropists, I think a lot of them, who are high net worth, either in sort of professional services or entrepreneurs themselves, started to realize that's how they run and grow their businesses, and that's the plans that they've created for their own ventures, right? So it made complete sense. They were like, okay, this is not a non-profit that I'm thinking of giving grant to. This is another person talking about, potentially growing this idea that's going to solve this amazing problem. And we saw aha moments, and we saw people sort of mindsets change around that table. So these giving circles were extremely exciting, and it was happening in a peer group. So you had these 10 individuals hashing out these plans, asking questions about their philanthropy, perhaps in a way like which they had never ever done. And the organization certainly hadn't seen philanthropists work like that with them. And so that was just amazing. And so, we did the one in 2010. I think we've sort of done about 15 since then, and various other ways of support as well.
And so I think this, I think this speaks to sort of the mindset shift that has occurred. And when we've heard it from others, that there is a mindset shift, it sounds like you've seen that organizationally, personally, and you deal directly with the effort to influence and get minds to change. Are you seeing other issues that are, pausing people along what we're calling the journey, the arc? Where are you seeing challenges, and how are people overcoming that? And how do you, as implementers of the organization's mission, how are you trying to help that?
So, I would say there, in our experience, and it's a segue actually to the next session, which is on empowering adolescents. In 2012, we started recruiting for Dasra's first giving circle on empowering adolescent girls. And this was our first giving circle that wasn't labeled education or health. And it was very difficult to actually recruit members for this circle from within India. And it came as quite a surprise and a disappointment. And what we found is that when we took this research report, when we took this vetted process that many high net worth individuals in Mumbai and in our community knew about and said, you know, why don't you join this giving circle that's going to keep girls in school in Rajasthan and UP and delay their age at marriage, donors would look at us and say, well, that's not really my business, and that's not an area of interest for me. And they were astute, smart people who were highly successful, but it was interesting that maybe the patriarchal views were just so great that they weren't able to see that if you valuing an undervalued resource, for lack of a better word, like a girl, would make a huge difference to her family, the community, and the GDP. And that was a fascinating learning for us. And what we had to do at that time was recruit members for this giving circle from outside of India, from Singapore, from the US, from the UK, who understood this. And instead of shying away from this challenge, we saw that challenge as an opportunity, and saw ourselves as, and pivoted ourselves a bit to see that how can we not only advance the work of organizations working with underserved populations, but really advance whole sectors that are underserved, and how can we build this adolescent girl empowerment sector. And so then we launched the Dasra Girl Alliance that we'll also hear about a bit later, and the 10 to 19 Adolescents Collaborative more recently, and the aim of that is to really leverage what Dasra has been great at in all other areas, which is to grow organizations, build the capacities of organizations, mobilize private sector funding, and facilitate collaborations and platforms that allow everyone to leverage their respective resources in the pursuit of a common agenda.
So I have a list of other questions, but I'm going to be mindful of time. I'm going to ask you to wrap up before we go to questions. Where do we go from here? What do we need? What do you need to do your jobs to make the U.S. effort successful? What do we need from the audience that they know beyond the audience that's in the room? What do we need?
Well, I would say that in India we're a large organization, but in the U.S. it's really us here, Boris. So it's you, me, Vishal, Boris, Safira, Steve.
That's right.
So we're a lean, mean team, and we need people to join this community and to fuel this movement in the U.S. of strategic philanthropy. And all of you are champions of this approach. We're staff members, so when philanthropists hear it from us, it's a lot less. We have a lot less influence than if they hear it from you. So we would like to provide you with the tools and the platforms to speak about your giving, to influence others, to be more thoughtful, and take all of this work seriously.
Vishal, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Safira spoke about this in the first panel, right? When she was talking about how she's sought, she has basically invested in education, right? In educating herself, and I think that is a great way to sort of combine where the intersection of the heart and the mind when it comes to philanthropy, because it can't be just one or the other. It is for the most part, a tremendously personal thing, and you have to sustain it and to keep on what we're calling the donor journey. So it's just not a one-time exercise. It's something that is self-fulfilling, and you continue to go deeper in it, and you continue on the journey. I think for that, you need to invest in yourself. You need to invest in education. What we've tried to do there, realizing that a lot of the community here is far from the work going on the ground. right? All of these amazing organizations that we have, others that are profiled in reports at the back of the room that are doing work in India. It's one thing to hear them here, but it's another thing to actually see the work on the ground, but also do it in a way where you are doing it, you're a part of a community when you're doing that. So you are with other peers, you're in a sort of structured learning program. So we've been talking about doing immersive learning journeys. We do these in Feb, March every year around our philanthropy forum in India that Radhika spoke about. For those of you who are interested, we would love to continue the conversation, see if there's anything here you've heard that's interesting, come speak, we would love to come speak to you. And if you're interested in visiting India, and many people in this room go to India in any case for like holidays or whatever, we would love to create opportunities to see some of this work in a structured manner that would help you on that journey and would really excite you.
Fantastic. Let's take just a couple of questions. I ran over a little time, but please.
So you just mentioned about the immersive study that you do in India. What is the process that we need to go through to get you to know about our organization's work in India?
So yeah, I mean, and specifically Ekal Vidyalaya, we know and have worked with some of the people in the organization in India. I think but that's a good question. We get asked that a lot because we've done research we've done like 80 research reports in a bunch of different sectors. So the way we've been kind of selective. Radhika mentioned there have been like 3.3 million nonprofits in India. So it's like, where do you start? Well, we said, let's start with issue areas and areas of research that we are interested in right now: urban sanitation, empowering adolescents, and governance and democracy within India are three big areas for us. We're doing a lot of research here. We're building communities of practice of nonprofits operating in that area. And I think so one easy fit is if organizations are working in these areas, it's a natural fit for us to work with them in a variety of different ways. There's capacity building programs through which organizations come. There are a variety of them. And I think once organizations come through these programs, we know them better. They know us. We align on sort of our mindset. And we sort of also then talk about opening up networks and helping them and building like trajectories and journeys for them.
Let's take one more question if we have it. Anyone? Please.
So do you train these organizations before to prepare them to pitch in front of the giving circle? Is there, what kind of engagement,
Yeah.
what kind of mentorship is there?
Yeah.
Is there prior to the giving circle? And the
Yeah.
second is, what percentage of your funding comes from India versus outside?
Sure. So with the organization, the training, there are two specific programs that we do. One is called the Dasra Accelerator Program. So it's for earlier stage nonprofits where we talk to them about, well, what is a business plan, what is a logic model, how do you actually create ones that you can talk to donors in a more educated manner. We do stuff like effective networking sessions. How do you actually talk about your work? How do you pitch it in more effective manners? So there's a lot of training in that. And then for some of the more mature organizations that are actually good at that, it's more around, we have another program called the Dasra Leadership Development Program. And we do that, and we actually partner with Harvard Business School to bring some of their case studies, some of that methodology, build cases that are India specific, but also use the case study methodology and really bring what we think in some ways is the best in education for the people who are solving the hardest issues, right? So we typically don't have nonprofit leaders go through these kind of programs. So we said we just need to make that happen. So that's what the Dasra Leadership Program is about.